below. First off, let's take a look at how the particular question will be introduced to us on the test. So first off, you will notice that in the directions, it will describe the fact that there are 4 statements that you will hear about the picture in the book. When you hear the statements, you must select the one statement that best describes what you see in the picture. Then you need to find the number of the question on your answer sheet and mark your answer. Now, the real challenge here is in this next statement. The fact is the statements themselves are not printed in the test book, and you'll hear them only once. So again, what you will see on the test form itself are basically just 4 letters, A, B, C, and D, and the picture. So this can be our first sort of challenge when we're taking this part of the test, is that we don't actually get to see the statements that they're reading to us. We actually just listen to them once. Now, in order for us to begin to prepare for the photograph section, it'd probably be helpful to think about what a photograph is actually showing us. So let's take a moment to think about what do we actually see in the picture? What do you think might actually be the focus of the photo? Which ideas or items seem to be important, and maybe which ones are not? Now, of course, we don't ultimately know this information until we hear the actual statements. But, for example, it may not necessarily be important to know that there is probably a window over here on this side of the screen, or that perhaps this guy is wearing a tie. But we do notice there are a few things that kind of stand out. For example, how many people are involved in the picture, the things that we see on the table. Let's take a look at this a little more carefully. So again, we see people standing around a table and they appear to be talking. Now think about for a moment, what kind of people are they? Could they be professors? Could this be a business seminar? Obviously, the TOEIC is involved with business-related topics, so again, it's possible that they were at a meeting. Is this before or after the meeting? Well, we really don't know, but we can at least make some reasonable guesses before we actually begin to hear the information. Now, notice, of course, there are other objects in the room, too, and we have to think about, for example, what are these 2 things called? Well, first off, this particular item here is referred to as a podium. And this particular item here is referred to as an overhead projector. It's very possible that these 2 items might be referenced by name in the answer choices that we have to listen to. Now, thinking about the action of the picture, what do we think is happening, or perhaps has happened here? Do we even have enough information to guess? And can we think about why these people are here? Again, these are a lot of questions that we might want to think about when we're looking at the picture, but we will notice as we actually get to the listening portion, it might actually be somewhat tricky to think about this information. So, again, we really don't know much until we actually hear the statements. So now let's listen to the 4 answer choices. A. They're leaving the room. B. They're turning on the machine. C. They're standing near the table. D. They're reading the newspaper. Okay, now, of course, this next part is something that you will not see on the TOEIC, but let's take for the moment and analyze the choices as they're provided to us in the booklet. A. They're leaving the room. B. They're turning on the machine. C. They're standing near the table. D. They're reading the newspaper. Now this brings us to our first sort of TOEIC hint. And this is thinking about what a photo can include and what can we actually prove when we look at a photo. And this is where we see some differences from the listening section to the reading section. So, what can we prove? Well, the photograph section in general is usually about what we can directly identify and prove given the visual information that we have here. Now, you could make many guesses about what's happening or has just happened, but since the TOEIC is a test that we would consider to be reliable and valid, the answer choice has to be something that we can directly identify. So, for example, it would be probably pretty difficult for us to think about what is happening or just happened. Like, for example, did they go to a meeting? Because there could be too many different interpretations. So the idea here is we have to be able to see something directly in the actual photo. That's what the test is going to talk about. Now, as we go through each answer choice, let's see if we can kind of think about what are the particular tricks that are involved in trying to eliminate the incorrect answers. Now, let's look at A. They're leaving the room. Now, this idea might be possible because it looks like that perhaps this meeting or presentation is finished. So again, notice the projector has been turned off. But it also could be that the speaker hasn't even begun yet. This could actually be before the meeting. So again, this might be possible, but this is probably one that we might eliminate a little bit later. But let's keep it for just a moment. Now for B, this one is definitely going to be one we can eliminate. First off, you notice the word machine is being used here. And the first thing we need to realize is that that's a pretty general word. So, and most likely, they would never use something that general on the test. So this is one that we can see pretty much we can eliminate. Okay, the next one. Well, we do notice that this is something we can prove from the photo. All of them do seem to be fairly close to the table that's included in the photo. So in this case, we think this one's possible. Let's keep it. And the last one, they're reading the newspaper. Well, let's think about the potential trick that's included here. If you look on the table for a moment, there does seem to be something that you would read. But again, this is most likely an agenda or a prospectus or notes from a presentation, something that would definitely not be a newspaper. So in this case, we can eliminate this one as well. So you might recall that in the previous video series, when we discussed the process of elimination, we generally would have two choices to think about. So in this case, between A and C, which one do we think most directly describes something we can prove from the video, from the photo? Well, I think we can see at this point we can't prove that they're leaving the room. We don't know if this is before or after the meeting. So in this case, our best choice is probably going to be C. They're standing near the table. And that one is the correct answer. Now, we probably should go ahead and discuss an important strategic point here for the TOEIC. The first challenge you will notice is on the listening section. There is no note-taking. And this is definitely unfortunate, and it certainly puts you at a disadvantage when it comes to remembering the information you hear on the test. Now, on the TOEIC itself, you're not allowed to write anywhere in the test booklet, and you're not allowed to take notes on a separate sheet of paper. And in fact, these are forbidden by ETS and the TOEIC, and you most likely would be removed from the test center if you were caught writing these things down. So the question is, what can you do? Well, again, the first difficulty after not being able to take notes is the fact that nothing is repeated. So hopefully the answer would be apparent to you. So one strategy I recommend is, as you are listening, take your pencil and actually place your pencil on each of the answer choices as you listen to them. And then as you are listening, think about the one or two choices you might think are possible. Then completely fill in the circle that you think is correct. So this kind of way helps you to focus your attention while you're listening. Another strategy, which you might find even more helpful, is to actually repeat the answer choices out loud. Now, of course, what I mean out loud, I mean softly to yourself, in the exact order that you hear them. Because really this part of the test, if you think about it, is actually testing your memory and your ability to perceive information quickly at the same time. So I might recommend that this might be a better strategy because it helps keep the information fresh as you're repeating it. Now we're going to demonstrate this with another question that's provided to us in the sample booklet. So first off, again, let's examine the photo. First off, think about what we can see in the picture, and then think about the strategies we've just discussed. So in just a moment, when you listen to the answer choices, try to repeat the answer choices in the order that you hear them. Now let's listen. A. He's checking his watch. B. He's wearing a jacket. C. He's adjusting his tie. D. He's folding his clothes. Now, before we actually analyze the answers, it's the perfect time to think about the tricks that the test is trying to use. So, in this case, when we say trick photography, obviously we're not referring to special effects. But what we're thinking about is, how can we trick students with this section of the test? Well, one of the easiest ways to do this would actually be to include some information in each distractor that actually is correct. So the key is when we focus on all of the answer choices. Remember, we won't really know what we're going to be focusing on until we actually hear the question. So when you think about it, oftentimes the information that's being asked may actually not be something you think is important, but really is just something that's fairly simple. So again, this might get you into trouble if you try to think too much about the picture. But it is important to understand that the question will be asking something that you can directly identify or prove. Now, listen again to the four answer choices. A. He's checking his watch. B. He's wearing a jacket. C. He's adjusting his tie. D. He's folding his clothes. So, in this case, the answer is B. Now, let's analyze the choices. First off, notice that in each one, there actually is some information that is included in the picture. For example, we do see a watch. We do see the person's wearing a jacket. There is a tie. And when we think about folding, especially this last one, we do notice that he's folding something, but is it his clothes? Well, we'll see in just a moment what the trick is. So again, notice that in each distractor, there is something that's correct. So he is wearing a watch, but the key is whether he is checking it. So oftentimes the trick is not necessarily focusing on the last word of the sentence. It's really thinking about the middle words of the sentence. So we can notice that oftentimes these are the words that we often miss, because oftentimes when people are speaking quickly, we usually hear the first word of the sentence and maybe the last word very clearly. But sometimes the middle can be kind of confusing. Okay, let's try one more. Now, look, before we even listen, let's think about what can we actually prove directly with this picture. What are things that we can actually observe and identify just from looking at the photo? And again, be careful, it might be something simple that you weren't paying attention to. For example, we notice that the person here is wearing an earring. Now, you may not think that's important, but remember on the TOEIC, they're not necessarily looking for important information. They're looking only for something that you can prove. She does seem to be looking into some sort of device, but we can't necessarily say, is she a scientist? We don't really know that. But we can prove the fact that she's looking into this particular apparatus here. And the reason I'm not mentioning it by name is because this might be a trick that we'll see in just a moment. But now that we're getting ready, let's listen to the four choices. A. She's speaking into a microphone. B. She's putting on her glasses. C. She's studying from a book. D. She's using a microscope. So, this brings us to our final TOEIC trick of the video. And that is the fact that oftentimes answer choices may also have similar sounding words. So in this particular example, you notice that we had two words that had very similar sounds, especially because they had similar prefixes, microphone and microscope. So we can notice that the first parts of these, micro, are exactly the same. Now, of course, they both can't be the same word. So the key, of course, is could you catch that information because we only had the chance to listen to it once. So again, this is a fairly common trick on this section of the test, mostly because there are limited ways for the test to confuse you on this section. So again, the idea here is with similar sounding words, you have to be able to catch this information quickly, because remember, the information is not repeated. So listen again. A. She's speaking into a microphone. B. She's putting on her glasses. C. She's studying from a book. D. She's using a microscope. So, which one is the answer choice? Well, if you said D, you're correct. And again, notice that part of the idea was focusing on the key word of microscope, which is the idea that we can clearly see here in the picture.